handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2 1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4 7 tree 9er 8 9er out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds HEPT. Gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Very happy you could join us for the ride. I got the distinct pleasure of having a previous guest with us. That is Emanuele Ottolenghi, who is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, one of my favorite sites, one that I rely on pretty much daily. But Emanuele is an author. He's got extensive resources and investigations and experience when it comes to the Middle East, with concentration on sanctions, illicit finance, and mostly with Iran. And that's going to be the topic of where we're going to go today. So, Emanuele, thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
It's a pleasure to be back. Thank you for having me.
You almost don't know where to start with Iran. I mean, we're on the outside looking in, and you're on the, certainly on the inside tracking all of these things. But Iran came into a lot of money. Iran is operating under a joint plan of whatever it is. I'm not even going to call it some kind of a nuclear agreement. And then there are sanctions. But most recently, with this infusion of cash that the United States was so generous in giving, it seems that Iran is enhancing their aviation sector, especially when it comes to Airbus and Boeing. Can you explain that for us?
Absolutely. So for many decades, Iran was under sweeping sanctions that included denial of access to the aircraft market. So Iran couldn't buy new airplanes, could not buy spare parts, could not upgrade and modernize its fleet, and had serious difficulty also buying used planes in more recent years. So Iran has an aging commercial fleet of almost 300 aircraft, all combined, with about 17 airlines operating domestic, regional, and international routes. And of course, they pinned down the rusting nature of the sector and the statistically frequent aviation accidents on sanctions. So in the negotiations over the nuclear program, the United States agreed, as part of the package, to lift these sanctions and enable the aviation sector of Iran to buy new planes. Now, so far so good, except that some of the airlines in Iran are still under U.S. sanctions for a very, very sinister reason, namely that these airlines routinely provide material support to terrorism because they are complicit in the movement of weapons and military personnel aiding Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad, which is perpetrating a genocide against its own people in the 6-year-long civil war in Syria. Now, these airlines are under sanctions, and some of the airlines that have been actually allowed to purchase aircraft that are no longer therefore under sanctions are also participating in these activities. So here's the problem. The problem is that the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement, has allowed Iran to modernize its civil aviation sector, but Iran's civil aviation sector is being used by the regime for military purposes and to support terrorism. So there is a clear contradiction in terms, and the concern here is the following. Since the nuclear agreement was signed, Iranian airlines have completed or are negotiating deals with the European aircraft manufacturing giant Airbus and the U.S. manufacturing giant Boeing for over 300 planes. So that would double the size of the entire commercial fleet of Iran within the next 10 years, and the value of these deals is close to $40 billion. So the risk is that the economic benefits that these corporations are accruing from the deal will act as a powerful lobby against the imposition of sanctions against airlines and companies that are basically facilitating terrorism, and which means obviously supporting actions that are diametrically opposed to the interests and the national security of the United States.
When they're exporting terror, it isn't just in the Middle East, though, is it? They're obviously very involved with Iraq. They're very involved with Syria. They're very involved with North Korea. But we have to kind of bring it over into our own hemisphere when I would say there was Cuba, there's Venezuela, and other parts of Latin America. What say you?
That is absolutely correct and very important, and thank you for mentioning it. We are actually, in the midst of watching this horrific crisis in Venezuela with the country's descent into, potentially a civil war with growing violence, with the democratic opposition that has been denied the right to peacefully demonstrate and bring peaceful democratic change, with mounting repression from the regime. And it's important to notice that Venezuela is not only a close ally of Iran, but its entire repressive apparatus has been trained by the Iranians alongside the Cubans. The Iranians have learned an invaluable lesson from their experience of putting down peaceful democratic protests in 2009 after the fraudulent elections that put back into power Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. So they know how to quash peaceful democratic dissent, and they taught the Venezuelans well. Now, Venezuela has turned into a narco-state and a gateway for illicit activities all over the Western Hemisphere. The Iranians are benefiting from their contact and cooperation with Venezuela. They have used Venezuela to let Hezbollah operatives into Latin America with fake identities provided by the Venezuelan state. They now have Venezuelan names and citizenship. So there is a lot to be said there. And also Iran uses Latin America through the proxy of Hezbollah and the Lebanese communities in Latin America that support the organization in order to finance terrorism in the Middle East through illicit activities, including interfacing with organized crime. So all of that either directly or indirectly affects the security of the United States. I mean, just to think about the fact that Hezbollah, with the backing of Iran, cooperates with the drug cartels across Latin America and launders money through the financial system, including in the United States, means that there is a damage to the integrity of our financial system, but also that these activities fuel the drug epidemics in our country. Just to remind you, in Lebanon, Hezbollah is involved in the production of opioids, and there are concerns that they may start being involved with it in Latin America too. We have an epidemic here in the United States. It's connected, at least indirectly, to these activities. So when you bring it all together, it beggars belief that as part of the nuclear deal, the United States is permitting Iran to modernize a key component of its infrastructure and industry that is used to support terror activities.
We have a P5+1 that we're signatories to the joint plan of action with Iran. And I would argue that the other countries, too, are recognizing the same violations and the same lanes of terror and the same illicit activities. And yet these other signatories, these other countries are overlooking all of these facts, all this evidence, tangible evidence, as in some cases the United States is Emanuele, is this coming down to just because we need to have revenue and we need to have oil?
Well, I think it's more complicated than that. And actually, I'm glad you brought the other five signatories to the JCPOA, because the truth is they don't see eye to eye with the United States on these issues. The Europeans have not fully designated Hezbollah as a terror organization. They have only designated what they call the military wing of Hezbollah, which is an artificial distinction between Hezbollah's military activities and its political, social, and economic activities. But the fact of the matter is, these are two sides of the same coin. So they haven't fully targeted Hezbollah. They are keen, very eager to restart their once booming trade with Iran. They view Iran as potentially an ally, or at least a partner in the fight against radical Sunni Islam of the kind of the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. And so they are loath to take the kind of action that the United States may be contemplating now against Iran, including, beginning with sanctions, because they think that the Iran nuclear file is closed, and that compared to the other threats in the Middle East, Iran is actually comparably moderate, pragmatic, and a power we can work with. So there is that problem. Now, with the Russians and the Chinese, it's even worse. I mean, the Russians are on the ground fighting in Syria on the side of the Syrian regime, and therefore rubbing shoulder and coordinating in the fight with Hezbollah as a partner in combat. So they themselves don't see Iran as a problem. They also see Iran as a tool with its own ambitions in the region to diminish U.S. influence and to countenance U.S. interests. So the U.S. is confronting a serious problem. Since the JCPOA was signed, was reached, those five countries, those five powers who are signatories along the United States to the agreement, who are guarantors of its implementation, are no longer interested in looking at Iran as an antagonist power with ambitions and aspirations that are diametrically opposed to our own interests. And therefore, they're not going to come along with us in trying to fix the problem.
So if we apply sanctions, however, because we know these things, would it put pressure on those other countries to do the same? Or are they just going to kind of march along and just say that's okay, it's not affecting us?
Well, so it depends what the United States would do. And the aviation sector is a great example where the United States, on its own, with its own unilateral sanctions, can actually have a significant impact for two reasons. First, because, of course, Boeing is a U.S. manufacturer. Sanctions against either the aviation sector as a whole or against Iran Air, the national carrier of Iran, which is currently the signatory of 2/3 of those contracts to buy new planes. So these sanctions would prevent Boeing from selling the aircraft. It would have a significant impact on Iran, on its economy. The second impact, of course, is that you need financial institutions to provide the cash to support these financial deals. Usually, airlines don't buy with cash up front the aircraft that they use. Leasing schemes are much more common. One would expect this is to be the case with Iran as well. And therefore, if the U.S. passed sanctions, the banking sector, whether in the United States or abroad, would be very, very careful to get into a deal to finance aircraft because that would cut them off from the global financial system. So these sanctions would be extremely effective. Now, some of the aircraft, of course, are going to be made by Airbus, a European-based manufacturer, but more than 10% of the parts of those aircraft are actually made in the United States, and so the U.S. sanctions would affect those sales as well. So, long story short, U.S. sanctions against Iran Air would kill the aircraft deals. They would undermine deals worth over $40 billion. They would send a chilling message through the financial system globally. They would discourage banks not only to finance aircraft deals that are now under sanctions, but also probably other deals, because it would create a climate of uncertainty. So even if other countries would not want to follow in the footsteps of such a measure by the United States, these measures would be extremely effective. Now, other measures that worked in the past are no longer within reach because they relied on the willingness of the international community to enforce and to go along with the United States. So the United States sanctions toolkit is more limited today if it has to act alone, but it can still have significant impact if it is crafted carefully in a targeted way against sectors that are particularly vulnerable to U.S. restrictions alone.
Iran just signed one of the largest automobile deals ever with France's automotive company Renault in the last day or so. So beyond Airbus, Iran and France look like they're completely almost in full-blown partnership. Is this all okay with Macron? Is our State Department putting any kind of pressure on them in that regard at all?
Unfortunately, the deal covered the automotive industry, reopening business in that sector by U.S. agreement. And one has to remember that the European car manufacturing sector had very lucrative deals with Iran prior to the sanctions. Renault was one of the partners to Iran's manufacturing car industry, and so I think that the French basically, the minute that the former President Obama agreed to the deal, felt that there was no reason not to do these deals anymore. That was the message. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem with the car industry is that a lot of the technology used to manufacture cars, including a lot of the raw materials or assembly machinery, are dual use. That was part of the logic for the United States to sanction the car industry in June 2013. And the minute that these sanctions have been lifted, we expose ourselves again to the risk that procurement and joint ventures such as the one with Renault will be used by the Iranian regime not only to rebuild and modernize its manufacturing sector, but also to acquire technology, raw materials, and know-how that can be put to service in the future to make its nuclear program more advanced, more effective, and therefore more lethal.
Where does the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps fit into all of this, Emanuele?
Well, broadly speaking, the IRGC controls approximately 20% of the Iranian economy. This control cuts across the board. There is no one sector controlled by the IRGC and other sectors that are not. So whenever Western companies go into business with Iran, and now they can due to the nuclear agreement, there is always the possibility that they will encounter buyers, business partners that are controlled by the IRGC. And this applies both to small, medium-sized companies and also to big, publicly traded companies on the stock exchange. The fact of the matter is the IRGC is a very astute investor in the Iranian economy. They have bought stakes in numerous important companies in the telecommunication sector, in the automotive sector, in the petrochemical sector, in the mineral extraction sector. Wherever you turn, you find IRGC presence or influence. Now, we have rules in the United States, and Europeans as well have rules about what constitutes an IRGC company that are usually determined by the amount of control that the IRGC has. So if they own more than 50% of the company, we consider them IRGC. But the problem is that often the IRGC will own 5%, 10%, 12%, 15%. But then they get to appoint the chairman, or they have a majority of board members in the company. And so even though the numbers make us sleep well, once one looks at the reality of who is in charge of these companies, the IRGC call the shots and benefit from the revenue. So it's very difficult to go into business in Iran today and steer completely clear of the IRGC.
Ooh, what a convoluted mess. We got just a couple of minutes left, and I want you to promote the documentary True Iran, if you would, that I saw at the Capitol Theater.
I am very glad you bring it up. True Iran is a fantastic 1 hour long insight into what Iran truly is, the nature of and impact of its revolutionary ideology. It brings together a number of experts that cover important ground on different themes, whether the nuclear one or the history, the revolution, the ideology. I have a little cameo appearance there, so of course I'm partial to the movie.
I like it.
But to be fair, it is a very good movie. It is very public friendly. It brings together very dramatic footage and great insight and testimony by people who have studied Iran for the better part of their adult life. And everyone who wants to understand why Iran still is a problem should see that movie.
And they can go to what, trueiran.org to see it?
I believe that's the case, yes.
Okay. Iran is really a rogue country whose story had a beginning, but it seems to have no end.
Yes, Iran, but let's not forget one thing. Iran is a problem because it has a regime that pushes this revolutionary, subversive vision that is also fueled by regional power ambitions. But Iran is also an ancient civilization with a rich tapestry of history and culture and people, and the people of Iran are not all behind this regime. Mm-hmm. They constitute our best hope, because no people will live forever under dictatorship acceptingly.
Emanuele Ottolenghi with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for your time and your presentation, and we'll keep watching for all the good work that you produce, and thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Thank you so much for having me today.
My pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way.
You're listening to Red Nation Rising Radio, the new dominant force in conservative internet talk radio.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you these two 24/7 streams of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. Talk America Radio is a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. Please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. You can contribute monthly or send us a one-time amount. We'll put it to good use continuing to share the American voice. Thank you.
Hi, this is Michelle Malkin from CRTV.com, and you're listening to Talk America Radio, the new dominant force in conservative talk radio.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia. And WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. We're going to change gears. And a former Navy SEAL, Craig Sawyer, is with us. So please give him a warm welcome and thank him for his service. And interestingly enough, like all the rest of the veterans I've seen out there and had on the show, they're never through with their service to their country. So, Craig, thank you for being with us. And we're going to kind of get into the weeds here because you're a true defender of commander-in-chief, regardless of whether you're active or not. Did I say that right?
Yeah, you did. And the reason I back him is because he backs the Constitution. The oath that we swear is to the Constitution, our protective Constitution that protects all American citizens. And so because he backs our Constitution, I back him. And that's what it's really all about.
Well, look, here's the drill. I'm watching this thing very carefully. There are some things to scrutinize about Trump, but we have to keep looking at the bigger view all the time. And I'm a little disgusted at some of the advice or counsel that he is getting because he does from time to time shoot from the hip, and then his staff has got to kind of take it back. And what is really a problem here is the media. They are watching. They question whether he raises his left eyebrow or his right eyebrow. They question whether, he's walking first or last. They question whether he's wearing the same tie every day or not. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so as a consequence, he can't get anything wrong. He has to be exacting to neutralize these attacks. Because there's an interesting thing that came across my radar yesterday, and that was There are thousands of lawsuits against his administration already. So now we have not only media warfare, but we have a legal warfare campaign that's going on. What say you?
What say I is that you cannot win a one-way fight, meaning the radical, subversive left who are out to undermine our Constitution, undermine our people on behalf of global interests, are attacking him with everything that they have. And if he does not fight back and put them on the defensive, there's no way he can expect to achieve much during his administration. And the SEAL team, we call it fire superiority in a firefight, in a tactical situation. You can't let your enemies shoot at you at their leisure, because they're only going to get better at it, and they're only going to get more comfortable at it, and it's only going to become more effective. That cannot be allowed. What I have been screaming at the top of my lungs to anyone that I know that's got the president's ear is, for the love of God, please, Mr. President, return fire on these crooks who are attacking you like little demons, throwing frivolous, false accusations as fast as they can just to try to gum up the works and cause a log jam, so that he cannot reverse all the damage that we're facing in D.C. and make our country more effective again. So I think what he really, really must do is get an AG in there who is supremely aggressive and righteous man who is above reproach and will not apologize to anyone for anything, but will drop the hammer as is so clearly needed. And I see Jeff Sessions as a man who everybody likes and everybody kind of respects him because he's been in for so long and he gets along with everybody. Well, I think because of that, he's the wrong man for the job. I think, and I don't know him personally, but from a distance observing him, he wants to smile and make nice and not cause any waves. Well, when you've got a group of radical subversives that are that hostile and that criminal and that treasonous and that seditious against our country, you cannot smile and make nice with them and try not to upset them. The hammer needs to fall. We need to be perp walking people by the dozens daily. I'm talking about some of the biggest names in Washington, D.C. We all see the crimes that they're guilty of against we the people. And until they start hanging by ropes for treason, American citizens will not have any faith in the system. We have been starved for justice. We see clear and flagrant wrongdoing, and nothing is done about it. It makes us sick at our stomach to see a nice man like Jeff Sessions smiling and making nice and playing beltway ball while we the people get sold down the river, while our economy gets sold down the river, while our national defense gets sold down the river, while billions of dollars get sent to our enemies by the Obama administration and others. It's come to a point where we need a serious house cleaning. And it's like the White House has been infested with termites. You got to go rip the thing apart and rebuild it. You can't just go make nice and put a nice little candle in the corner and a new picture on the wall and smile and make nice and pretend like it's good. That won't work. It's too far gone.
Craig, we knew this was coming. I mean, all the indicators were there directly after he got the nomination, and we saw the platform of the DNC, the Democratic National Convention. We saw that this was coming. When you've got these organizations like Media Matters and Crew, and you've got Eric Holder out there that's representing 30 states in some of these lawsuits and whatnot. Look, I argue that the quasi or alleged Bannon War Room, which apparently didn't get funded, was way behind the 8 ball on this. That's the first thing, because they should have been prepared for this conflict. And I mean, it is a political, militant conflict. I'm with you on that one. But conversely, I got to ask you, Craig, and that is, this administration has got people in place in these different agencies. Why are we not coughing up some stuff here to expose everything that happened in government in the last 8 years? Why haven't we declassified Fast and Furious to slam Eric Holder up against the wall? You see what I'm saying? Why hasn't there been a Trump edict going to the Department of Justice that says we are formally opening an investigation on Hillary Clinton? You know what I'm saying? I mean,
I do know what you're saying.
I expected it.
I share your frustration.
Ugh.
I don't know that they did not expect it. What I can tell you, having been a federal criminal investigator, is that some of these high-level cases must be, especially in the high-pitched political climate that engulfs Washington, D.C. right now, have to be done very carefully and strategically. This is not checkers. You can't just say, well, that's someone that's clearly guilty. Let's prosecute and perp walk them right now. It's kind of like 3D chess instead, because there are people in the way. There are obstacles that you and I cannot see from our position here. We are not made privy to those things. I know that there is a world of opposition and hostility surrounding President Trump. I share enough mutual contacts with he and his family to know that he means what he says. He's accomplishing the things that he actually ran upon. So whether people love him or hate him, he is true to his word. What he said is what he is actually intending and attempting to do. So I think it's just a matter of getting his full cabinet in place and getting his full footing before they can lay out and actually start to drop the hammer. You got to realize that a lot of his people aren't even in place yet, because many of the people that are responsible for granting security clearances for Trump's cabinet have been blackmailed through brownstoning operations, sexual blackmail. And their orders are to deny or slow roll the security clearances for his staff. So that's what he's facing. So he doesn't even have his full team set in place yet. And add to that you described thousands of lawsuits. I mean, that's just the kind of thing that little demons do to try to muddy the water, cloud the issue, so that they can run and hide, so that they're not caught for the extensive crimes for which they are guilty and must be held accountable. So I think we have to be as frustrated as we are and as and out of patience as we are. I think we just got to have a little faith in the man, take a deep breath, and hope he can work through this, get his full cabinet in place, get the right people that'll actually back him, straight and honest people who apologize for nothing, and then start dropping that hammer. And I think once the first one goes, it'll be a cascading positive effect, and we'll see scumbags perp walked en masse here before long.
I can only hope that you're right. In the meantime, if you start flipping channels, which I do from time to time, just to kind of get another feel for what else is being said out there. In fact, my TVs are on all the time, but they're always on mute because I don't want to be influenced. I want to do my own stuff here. But sometimes I have to trot on over to CNN, and sometimes I have to trot on over to watch Rachel, and sometimes, I have to go, pick up on what happened on The View today. But I just gotta tell you that I'm not sure the media thing can be fixed. Do you, Craig?
Well, I don't know that we need to fix it. Here's a couple dynamics. I think the American public needs to take an honest look at who own those outlets and what those entities' political views are. If we understand that their political views are anti-American, then we should not expect them to empower we the people with information that would give us empowerment and leverage for what is in our best interest. those who own all of our mainstream media, news media outlets, are in fact hostile to we the people. They're tied in with the globalist worldview that puts them in extreme positions of power, a totalitarian model of government that may benefit them, but it's a nightmare of basic type of slavery for us. So we have to recognize that and kind of wipe them off the map and discredit them and not give them the ability to shape what we think any longer. We have to recognize where the information's coming from and why it's spun to the ridiculous degree that it has become now, and seek alternate sources and learn more from those on the ground in these events and see it for what it actually is. You mentioned comparing the different outlets. I've been doing that for the last 15 years deliberately, traveling internationally, working for different agencies on high threat protection missions for those in the intelligence community and diplomatic community, watching the Armed Forces Radio television network. They switch every 30 minutes between news outlets. And so from that, I got into the habit of seeing and comparing. One says the sky's purple, the other one says the sky's orange, immediately after. So you have to kind of compare their view and what their agenda is and what that should mean to us. So I think it's empowering to recognize that depending on which channel you turn to, you're going to hear a different reality of what's going on there. And it's important for us to know and not just swallow it hook, line, and sinker and accept it as fact, because we can see that clearly it is not any longer.
How, in your travels abroad, and, I watch international media quite a bit, the media industry is feeding off of each other. And I think one of the other sad commentaries or sad results of all of this is other world leaders are being influenced to say, this cat in the White House ain't all that, he's professed to be, and that is not necessarily advancing the cause of the United States globally. I think this is yet another issue. Do you see that, Craig?
I don't see that to the degree that you might.
Okay.
I see other leaders having a much better and clearer view of the reality than the American citizens do under the likes of MSNBC and CNN. Mm-hmm. Look, there's a reason why CNN's own viewers have bailed on them to the degree that they rate two spots below Nick at Night. Literally, Nick at Night is at 11th with cartoon reruns, and CNN is 13th. So if their own liberal audience recognize that they're being lied to the degree that they no longer care to even watch, that should be an indicator. And I give other world leaders credit for having a clearer view. I've heard some of them express their observations, and they do seem like their intelligence folks have them a lot better informed than the average American citizen. And so I don't think they buy the liberal media spin that we suffer under here, and it's not that bad. Now, the ones that the European leaders, take Merkel. I mean, she's deep in bed with the globalists and Soros, and she's the one infesting Germany as fast as she can with as many jihadists as she can, pretending like it's magically going to work out, charmingly, and then it's going to be utopia. Let's just flood our country with terrorists and expect the best. She's dirty, and she's on board with the destruction. So no one should expect her to tell it straight. She's not honest from the beginning. So some of those that are complicit are obviously, we're not going to get an intelligent response from them. But the others that are sitting back are going, yeah, okay, we see what's happening here. So it's really, I would take a little more heart than that. So it doesn't, from my observation, it doesn't appear to be as widespread a disinformation as we suffer from here.
Let's talk about leaks. We've had Kelly in there as chief of staff for over a week now, and all of a sudden it just seems that some of these leaks may necessarily have dried up. Have you felt that or seen that?
Well, I hope that. I think time will tell. It does seem to be a promising initial start, but these things will take time to bear out. It is noteworthy for people to realize that the entire Russia collusion and Trump being a puppet of the Russians has already been effectively scientifically debunked due to the fact that the server that the information was gained from downloaded faster than its capability. The information was downloaded faster than the server's capability to put it online. So therefore, it was impossible for any external source to have gained that information, and it was therefore, as physically proven, an internal download by the DNC, not an external hack by any source, including the Russians. So that's something that if the media were intellectually honest, that would be headline news. Yet there's silence about it. So I think people have to recognize what we're facing here. There's a desperation to deceive the American public, to usher in a tyranny that none of us must tolerate.
If I was to put on your calendar that you have a 30-minute exclusive session with Trump on next Monday, and you needed to impart some things to him, some advice or some specific information that you feel like he may not be getting, what would be your presentation to him in a 30-minute time span?
I would say, Mr. President, 99% of your problems are being funded and encouraged and empowered and what's the word I'm looking for? Enabled by George Soros. Mm-hmm. He is guilty of numerous felonies against our Constitution, against our laws. He can be arrested and should be arrested immediately. Then, if you got people like Holder, who are representing 30 of these states and their attacks against the president, guess what? He, too, is guilty of numerous felonies against our country and should be in federal prison. Garrett, Holder, Lynch, the Clintons, I could go on all day. They should already be behind bars, but nobody is bothered to deal with it. I would say, for the love of God, Mr. President, get an AG that has a pair that'll go and drop the hammer and start perp walking these clowns and put an end to it. Their attacks are frivolous. They're acting on falsified accusations, and they are, meanwhile, guilty of real felonies. So where is the justice? Let's have that happen. Meanwhile, you need to go, Mr. President, I would say, take the head of each of your key agencies and replace them, if need be, with someone that you have complete faith in their moral integrity. Let's say, John, I'm going to give you this agency. This one's going to be the FBI. You are my new FBI director. You will hereby carry out my commander's intent. My commander's intent for you, John, is to purge the FBI of all anti-American subversives, all of those who are causing the logjam, to cause that agency not to fulfill its chartered mission for we, the American people. You are to get that agency back on its chartered mission in good faith. Am I cleared? Are there any questions? I will give you all the backing and support you need. You need to bring some key leaders with you, put them in place up and down the chain of command, promote those that are shining and doing good things, fire and get rid of those that are worthless, prosecute those within your ranks who are guilty of criminal activity. And if you shine, I'll hold you up for all the American people to celebrate as American hero. If you fail me, I'll fire you immediately and replace you with someone who will. And if you betray me, I will prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. or hung for treason if it comes to that degree. Go set about it. Then go to the next agency, same thing, and let them know you will endure scrutiny and oversight like never before. But this is a crucial time in our nation. We must clean house. We must purge these agencies of all these scumbags that are coming up the works and betraying the American people, and get them back to doing what they're supposed to do. If the president would do that and get those agencies back on track, they would be supporting him, supporting us, instead of backing the subversives and backing the foreign interests, backing Soros and the other hateful scumbags that are out to ruin our country. And we could really make progress. We could make this country so strong, so healthy, so bright and promising, so peaceful, and so profitable again, that these scumbags could never, it would take them generations to get back in there.
Well, I would say we've got a small window of time to do this, because the left is going to come after him with a vengeance, I would say, in about another year or so. They're mobilizing right now, such that the midterms are going to be kind of interesting, but the 2020 election cycle is going to be tough. So he's got really a small window of time to restore or demonstrate some restoration, such that he can, keep the Oval Office in 2020. Do you agree?
I agree that he will face that if nothing else is done. But if he would act in good faith and turn his AG loose, or get an AG that's going to do his job, most of these people that are attacking the president would already be in federal prison for felonies that they are already clearly guilty of. They need to be there.
Yeah, you're asking
90% of his most powerful opposition are already felonies.
You're asking the same thing I am. I've been wanting a consequence for 6 months. I want consequences for these people.
They need to be in prison. He's suffering from attacks by felonies who have not been dealt with yet.
All right, ladies and gentlemen.
If I had to fault the man, I would say he underestimated the level of
me too.
Force, like little demonic style, frivolous attacks, and the level of hostility. I think he felt like if he came in and made the economy better, and strengthened things and brought it back to common sense, as it was more effective, that he would somehow win them over.
Yeah,
the
it'd
way
be
he
redemption
could in business. But these people are not interested in that. They do not care that the economy is already much stronger. They don't care that the jobs are already way up. They do not care that unemployment is already way down, and that our national security is already on its way back up, and the jobs are returning, companies are returning to the United States and beginning to manufacture here. They do not care about any of it. They're on an anti-American globalist agenda, and they will attack him no matter what he does. And I fault him for not recognizing that and playing hardball. He's playing Sunday school badminton, and they're like playing mafia rules out there.
Big round of applause to you, Craig Sawyer, former Navy SEAL, and still at it with his service to the country. Please come back again. Nice job. And I commend you for the stick-to-itiveness that you've got here. So thank you for your time.
Well, my pleasure. I appreciate you having me on.
Come back again soon. Ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way.
You're listening to Red Nation Rising Radio, the new dominant force in conservative internet talk radio.
You can't handle the truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. See ya, over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. See ya, out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, Notice. Ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds HEVT. Gas TOT 53.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. We're going to switch gears again. It's a kind of a fun thing to do because we get to cover lots of topics, and I have the distinct honor of having a previous guest with us, and that is Luis Fleischman, who is with the Center for Security Policy. And thank you, Luis, for being with us. You're doing some remarkable work when you're talking about some conflicts that we have in Latin America, and we're certainly going to cover Venezuela because this is a tough one. And Luis, this has actually been going on now, I would say, for I think about since 2014 or 2015 that we were going to watch Venezuela take a nosedive here into full-blown tyrannical socialism. Did I go back too far on that?
Well, no. I think it's been clear. That's correct. I mean, 2014 there were major protests, but I would say that for a long time, even longer than that, the government of Venezuela has tried to impose a tyrannical rule over the Venezuelan people. Obviously using socialism as the ideology, but it was even more than that because it is a combination of socialism with fascism. It's an attempt to create a totalitarian state in the name of not just an ideal, not even when you call it socialism, it's maybe even too much for them. It is it's a mafia state that is involved in drug trafficking and use that money for personal enrichment. It's not even the implementation of an ideology. It's under the veil of a revolutionary ideology. They create a totalitarian state that eventually tends to perpetuate itself and turns into a mafia state, and most probably will be another small oligarchical state, the same way that Cuba turned into. It started with a communist revolution, but it ended up becoming a mafia state, supported by the military, and that is what the Venezuelan government has tried to do it from the very beginning.
Luis, under the Obama administration, they saw all the indications that this was coming, certainly when we were dealing especially with FARC, which I would argue is still not a resolved matter, but they did nothing. The Obama administration and the Hillary John Kerry State Department did nothing to, I guess, throw sand in the gears for this power grab. And I mean, this power grab is gone on with wild abandon there. What did the Obama administration? I mean, why did they just kind of ignore this? I mean, were they in solidarity with this thing happening?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't go that far, but I believe that the Obama administration came with an idea of reversing things in foreign policy, things that they consider to be reactionary, obsolete. And of course, one of them was the issue of Iran. I mean, if we don't have good relations with Iran, it's because we don't handle it well. So he went for an agreement that was pretty controversial in many aspects. And the same happened with Cuba. In other words, the entire foreign policy toward Latin America, besides trade, it was also focusing on changing the relation with Cuba. That means we are going to be the ones that will end up this diplomatic standoff that we have with Cuba for already over 50 years, more than as Obama said before I was even born. This status quo with Cuba, yes, he changed it, but he didn't change the nature of the Cuban regime, neither got any compromises. Now, the Cuban regime today is helping the Venezuelan regime survive by advising with the security apparatus. They depend on Venezuelan oil, and at the same time, Venezuela depends on them to build the security apparatus they have. Remember, the Cubans they build the security apparatus from the Stasi, which is the security apparatus of the East Germany, where it was built by many people that in the past belonged to Gestapo. So that is what we are having today, and in none of the meetings that Obama had with Castro, he never negotiated the idea of just please withdraw from Venezuela. Never does such demand existed. Now, I reject the idea that Venezuela is an extension of Fidel Castro in so far as Fidel is the one calling the shots. Not Fidel, I'm sorry, Raúl Castro calling the shots. I believe that, the Venezuelan regime is independently a mafia state. They may take some advice from Castro in order to survive. But other than that, I do not think that even if Castro actually withdraws from Venezuela, let's say, the situation is going to change a lot. But I think it's one of the conditions, and I believe that the Obama administration never understood, never wanted to understand what Venezuela represented in terms of even as a threat to the security of the United States. A threat, what a narco state means, what a state that has relations with terrorist groups such as the FARC or Hezbollah, that has strong contacts with Iran. None of this was understood by the Obama administration, and none of this was understood or has been understood by the State Department as a body. I'm not talking about individual diplomats, but as a body. So we are paying the price today. We are paying the price for not having spoken earlier. And you know that we've been on this case for well over a decade now. I mean the Center for Security Policy. Yeah.
Now, Maduro actually sent his defense minister to Moscow in April, which was it was kind of an interesting thing, and that is, it just kind of seemed like it didn't raise any recent eyebrows that happened. Was that any concern to you?
Absolutely. But more than that, you are talking about the trip of Vladimir Pedrino, the Minister of Defense, to Russia. I'm talking about drills and joint exercise between Venezuela and Russia that actually took place a few years ago. And our Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, basically laughed at them and said, let them do it. They never expressed concern about Russia having exercises in Venezuela, in a place that was so close, with Venezuela, in a place that was so close to the United States. So the situation is pretty bad in that sense. And I'll tell you one thing. Russia is seeing Venezuela as an ally because Venezuela basically is challenging the United States because Venezuela is anti-American.
Yes.
Now, it's true that on Friday, Donald Trump, our president, made a statement suggesting that the military option on Venezuela is not to be ruled out. Now, I personally believe that the military option is not necessarily a good option because I think it's going to be bloody. Venezuela has still, 280,000 troops. I think that there will be many, many American casualties unless the soldiers actually run away, which I'm not sure is going to happen because remember, after all, the army is just a chain of command. But what I think should happen is something simpler than that for the time being. Just cut the oil supply. Stop buying oil. Take over Citgo. Citgo is also lobbying Washington lobbying Washington on behalf of Venezuela. Freeze the assets, not just of individuals, of the entire oil of Venezuela, the oil giant. Now, what is going to happen? Some people say, well, the oil prices are going to go up. Yes, they may a little bit. But the question is that here we are defending our own security. Here we are defending a value, which is human rights, which is democracy, which is... And I believe that if you apply enough economic pressure on Venezuela, you may force defections. And I think it's important also to have a strategy of rewarding defections to a certain extent. that could be, in my opinion, a much better and much wiser strategy than intervening militarily. Now, what you can do militarily without even, shooting one single bullet is to basically have a naval blockade to make sure that the Russians are not going to come and supply either weapons or to make sure that they don't sell the oil to somebody else. In other words, should be really a siege of Venezuela up to the point that they force the Maduro government to resign. I think this is a situation, but I think the military option is extremely problematic, and I think it's going to. I think it's going to backfire to a certain extent.
I
think we can do it. But what I suggested, I think, is better. But again, that's my opinion. I cannot guarantee that what I'm saying is 100% right.
Well, I'm not sure under what premise we would do some kind of military intervention there. I would say that it's kind of interesting that I think Colombia signed a NATO cooperation agreement, which was very alarming for the Kremlin. And I think as a result of that the Kremlin sees that NATO is selectively cultivating some of the Latin American countries such that it would surround Venezuela, which is the reason that Mike Pence is on this Latin American tour. Would that be right?
In other words, what you're saying is, are you asking me if the trip of Mike Pence to Latin America currently to try to get alliances is a good trip? The answer is yes, unless I misunderstood your question.
No, you're right. You got it right.
It is a good thing. I think if you look at the vote that took place last June in at the General Assembly of the Organization of American States, although they didn't have enough votes to basically isolate Venezuela or at least expel Venezuela from the OAS, the majority of countries, at least the largest countries, voted for that resolution. Remember that the Organization of American States, you have like a disproportionate representation. In other words, the vote of a country such as Argentina or Brazil is equal to the vote of a country that has less than 1 million people. In other words, it is extremely uneven and unfair. But the reality is that the largest countries, the majority of Latin American countries, voted in favor. Now, having said so, what is the problem now in Brazil and Argentina? Brazil at least has a weak government at this point.
Yes.
Particularly after those investigations on corruption that eventually, didn't indict the president, but weaken him. Argentina, yesterday there was a midterm election that strengthened the power of the government that is very much against Maduro. But they need to take a stronger stand. And in my opinion, if Pence goes to Latin America and strengthens, at least gets the green light for major sanctions, where also Brazil and also Argentina join those sanctions, I think that is going to be very, very wise. Frankly, I do not know what is Pence's proposal. I have no clue. That's something that we will know after the trip. I assume that if he comes under the advice of the State Department is not going to propose sanctions. They always believe in a diplomatic solution that will never come. Yes. But if Pence actually gets the right advice, it's going to be, let's strengthen those coalitions, those relations with these large countries in order to create legitimacy to the concept of sanctions.
I haven't seen, have I missed it, Luis, where our Treasury Department has actually put some of these people on a corrupt list or a no-fly list kind of thing, like al-Assami or Padrino Lopez or some of the
last week, Maduro was put on that list to be sanctioned.
Okay.
In other words,
Okay.
cannot travel to the United States. At this point, there are about 30 senior officers on that. The
Okay.
question is whether that is enough. These people actually always manage to somehow survive. The question is whether these people are going to suffer. In my opinion, these sanctions are a good statement, but I think what counts the most is the fact that the United States should use that as a means of a warning, saying, well, if you don't change your ways, we are going to increase those sanctions. We are going to make it more painful for you. And in my opinion, this is the time to make it more painful.
Yeah.
I think the tendency should be to basically remove Maduro from power. So this is what needs to be done, and unless he changes his ways, but I doubt that he will. At this point, I would say yes, there are 30 high senior individuals in the Venezuelan government under sanctions, but this, in my opinion, is insufficient.
There's always one action always gets a reaction. And I would say whatever posture that the United States takes against Venezuela, we have to watch then Cuba, Iran, and Russia, because they would necessarily respond. I mean, they obviously have a whole four-corner operation going on here with consuming whatever they can possibly consume in Latin America, especially beginning with Venezuela. And then I don't know that we're necessarily paying enough attention to China either, are we?
I'll tell you one thing. I think we have an assumption that, let me make a distinction between Russia and China. Russia is a very belligerent and very aggressive type of actor, and they have an entire tradition. In other words, they also think politically more than economically, and therefore they are going to come to Venezuela's help, to Maduro's help, no matter what. In the same way that they did with Bashar al-Assad in Syria. The fact that he was a murderer, still is a murderer, a human rights violation, a violator, whatever, that doesn't bother the Russians. The Russians do not act based on moral considerations, but they do act based on political considerations. They will come to the help of any ally, no matter how evil that ally is. Correct. Now, the Chinese, there is a little bit of a misconception here, because it's true that the Chinese are not nearly as aggressive in terms of their foreign policy. They are more diplomatic. They are more subtle. They are a little bit more, I would say, charming, if you wish. But there is a misconception that they are only interested in economics. Like if something is not convenient for them in economic terms, they are not going to do anything about it. So some people actually point out that Venezuela owes China a lot of money, which is true, and therefore they are going to go away. They are not going to come to the rescue of Venezuela. That, in my opinion, is wrong, because China, although is a little bit more diplomatic than Russia, they also resent the fact that the United States dominates the entire Chinese backyard. Has relations with Japan, and has relations with South Korea, and has relations with the Philippines, and in other words, all these challenges in the South China Sea, and well, not to speak about Taiwan, all these relations all this fear, all this aggressive policy that China has in the South China Sea, obviously shows tremendous resentment over U.S. influence in Asia. Now, therefore, for them, helping Venezuela and its other allies in Latin America, Bolivia, Ecuador, Nicaragua, these are cards, or these are, I would say, chess pieces in their hands that they can use against the United States. So I would say that there is a danger coming from China as well. China may be smarter in terms of not trying to go into a military confrontation, but on the other hand, they are also see tremendous advantage if having 4 countries in Latin America that are openly hostile to the United States and in America's backyard.
We have a threat that we read about over the weekend against Marco Rubio, because he clearly has the White House ear when it comes to dealing with Cuba and especially and most recently Venezuela. That really into itself is an outrage that they've kind of put out a hit order on Marco Rubio. So just with that, I would think that there should be a more robust sanctions architecture on Venezuela. Is that going to? So you're thinking that could happen? That it could be a step process.
Well, I believe that a threat on Marco Rubio is a very serious matter, and I think the American government should protest that.
Yes.
The reality is that Marco Rubio is already having extra security now as a result of that, and that is not good. They are threatening our senators, and according to the writings, according to the reports, I mean, the threat is coming from Diosdado Cabello, who is basically the chief drug trafficker.
Yes,
and
he
actually, yes, and he is a guy that is connected, obviously, to the military, and he's one of the architects of the military support for this regime. The man is basically is a lowlife, to say the least. It is. I mean, I just read recently today, maybe a few hours ago, in one of the publications from Miami, that the Venezuelan government is going after Venezuelans living in Miami. That means that at this point, the Venezuelan government is appealing to the tactics that were applied by Stalin at one point, or the Iranians at another point, which is killing opponents living in exile. This is a very serious issue, and I think this is something that our security forces need to be aware. Remember, there are people in Miami and living in the United States that are connected to the Maduro government, and these people could serve as a catalyst of some sort of assassination attempt. If they don't try to assassinate, let's say, a senator or somebody who is influential, such as Marco Rubio, they will try at least to do it with Venezuelan exiles or people that they perceive as being in the opposition. Because at this point, the Maduro government is trying to do his best to survive. And they will do anything to survive. So they probably are going to try to begin killing opponents in the same way that Stalin did. Stalin went after Trotsky even into Mexico City. And the Iranians also killed a number of exiles, Iranian exiles and opponents in Europe. So this is what the government of Venezuela has become. And I think we need to be careful once and for all. Too much time was wasted.
Indeed it was. Indeed it was. Well, let's hope that Mike Pence can have some influence down there. And ladies and gentlemen, please go over and visit the Center for Security Policy. There's a lot of people over there, including Luis, that are just doing remarkable work trying to tell the story, certainly, of what is happening and could potentially happen in Venezuela. And Luis, we're so pleased that you could be with us, and we hope it's not so long the next time that you come back with a visit to the Denise Simon Experience.
Thank you so much, Denise. I will be there anytime you want me to.
All right, good deal. Thank you, Luis. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so make sure that you stay with us.
You're listening to Red Nation Rising Radio, the new dominant force in conservative internet talk radio.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia.
And Don Newen from Cowboy Logic Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't go to sleep every night completely fatigued, from trying to restore America from the destruction that is taking place?
Then you're simply not doing enough. Join us every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, for Cowboy Logic Radio.
Let the restoration begin.
Chris X Radio, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern, on the Talk America Radio Network.
Congressman Alan West joining us.
Well, thanks so much, Chris.
We're talking with Brigitte Gabrielle.
Oh, Chris, I am delighted to be with you.
Ted Nugent is here.
My pleasure, and congratulations with your show. I'm proud to be on it with you, Chris.
Listen to Chris X Radio, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern, right here on the Talk America Radio Network.
Hi, this is Denise Simon, the host of the Denise Simon Experience. I feel compelled to tell you people that Don Newen is my favorite talk radio host, period. Not Mark Levin, not Rush Limbaugh. I can't do this.
Do it, Denise. Read it. Read it, Denise.
Not Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham, but yep, Don Newen. Cowboy Logic Radio is featuring the ever-stellar, highly gifted Don Newen, right here on Talk America Radio.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio. On behalf of my beautiful co-host, Donna Fiducia, I'd like to express my gratitude to Denise Simon for those kind words. I don't think I could have done it better if I would have written that myself. Cowboy Logic Radio, every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, right here on Talk America Radio. This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
ATA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia, and WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. I want to tell you that Kim Gatto is with us. Kim is quite the equestrian and a sports writer with a handful of books to her credit. So to my listeners, for a few minutes, we're going to talk about horses and Elvis, quite removed from the normal topics and a wonderful, wonderful change. So thank you, Kim, for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Thank you, Denise.
I am just so thrilled to be able to talk about something other than all the other nonsense that we have to sometimes cover here on radio and current events. And I'm going to start off by just asking this question of you. There's a certain majesty and there's some kind of an innocence and calmness that comes around horses just to even look at them. Did I get some of that right? I mean, even as
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And, we just see, we drive by farms wherever we are, or, we look at them on TV or in books or in movies and whatnot. And there's just such a calmness about just seeing a horse in a pasture, right?
Yes, that's absolutely true. I've been fortunate to have horses my whole life, basically, since I was 13. So that is definitely true. And sometimes just being in the barn, listening to them eating their hay, it's just so peaceful. After a stressful day, it's like the best remedy. So absolutely, that's true.
So Elvis kind of found, I would say, solace in horses, didn't he? He, I would say he actually found a place that he could have some peace and some quiet of his own. And we never really knew that in his life, did we?
Absolutely, what you are saying is true. He, in all the research that we did for the book, we found that, it was a way for him to be away from, the pressures of fame and not being able to go out without being recognized. He was able to be with his horses and just kind of be a regular person and, just relax. And I think it was an important part of his life. For sure.
Now, I would say that we've got an awful lot of other celebrities in history that probably should have done necessarily what he did early on in his life. I think that there's some kind of stability that's separating yourself from the madness and finding some friendship in horses is a good thing.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm not sure if this came through because my phone had cut me off, but I personally have owned horses since I was 13. And so I know firsthand, the importance of that bond with the horse and how, after a stressful day, whether it's school or work or whatever, you could just go to the barn and just not even necessarily riding, although that is part of it, but to just be with the horses. And just, they're just so soothing. And one of my favorite quotes, I'm sure that you've heard, is Winston Churchill said, "The outside of the horse is good for the inside of a man." And it's just so true. And it was true with Elvis, too.
That's an interesting summary. Very true. Very true.
Mm-hmm.
Horses came into Elvis's life very early on in his life, correct?
Well, from what we gathered, he always loved animals. And, always liked horses, but because his family was so poor, we weren't able to find any evidence that he was able to own a horse until, much later when he was famous. But when he was just starting out, he used to go to a dude ranch in Mississippi called Gulf Hills, and it was like a place that you could go to and, rent a couple of horses and go off trail riding. And he had a girlfriend at the time, June, and they used to, do this often. And there are some pictures in the book, that show them at this dude ranch. And it was just a way for them to enjoy the horses. So it sounds like he always loved horses. But it wasn't until 1967 that he was able to actually have his own.
Kim, your book is titled All the King's Horses, The Equestrian Life of Elvis Presley. What made you write the book?
It's kind of an interesting story, actually. I am, as I mentioned, a lifelong horse owner and equestrian, and I write horse-related books. And 2 years ago, I had just finished my last book, and oddly enough, I didn't know anything really about Elvis because I was only 9 when he passed away, and so I only knew kind of the mainstream, some of his music and some of his movies, but not a lot. And I had a dream one night that Elvis was riding a horse. And at first I didn't really think, too much of it. And then it happened twice more in the same week. So it's kind of like, maybe I'm onto something here. So I decided to do a search on the internet and found that, in fact, he was quite a horseman. And, decided, wow, there really is a story here that needs to be told. And that's how it all started, so.
How were you able to collect the photos of Elvis and his horses for the book?
A lot of research. My co-author, Victoria, and I, went through a lot of different venues to get pictures, film studios, etc. And then actually, one of my favorite parts is that Elvis, when he would ride his horses, fans used to gather like outside the gates of his home to watch him. And he really embraced them. He loved his fans. So he used to actually invite them to come and watch him ride. And one of the ladies that was there at the time had taken a lot of photos. And in fact, Elvis had posed for photos for her. And I was able to use a lot of her photos, which was really nice because they're real candid shots of him, not movie shots, but shots of just him riding his horse. And you can just look at the pictures and see how happy he was and how at peace he was when he was doing this. And that was really a neat thing.
Well, nice job with that.
Thank you very much.
Good job on collecting those, because I mean, it certainly shows us the side of Elvis that we never really saw out there in the mainstream. It was always,
right,
him and his jewel-studded costumes, and
right,
and then later on in life, it was just scandal after scandal after scandal. So
right.
it's you've done kind of a public service for us and giving us another side of somebody that we never really knew. But what I found fascinating is he had actually quite an investment at Graceland for stables and horses. Yet another fact that we clearly did. I've been to Graceland, and I don't know how somehow I missed all that.
Oh, really?
Tell us about that.
Well, when he bought Graceland, there was a stable there, and they did some renovations to it. And one of the even more interesting stories to me, because I didn't know this, and I think a lot of people didn't know this, is he also bought another ranch specifically to have his horses, and it was called the Circle G, and it was in Horn Lake. It still is in Horn Lake, Mississippi. And the really interesting part of the story was that he was out. It was like the wee hours of the morning, and that's when he would go shopping for horses, because that was when he could go out and not be, mobbed by people. So he and Priscilla and a couple of friends were driving. They were going to look for a horse for his father, Vernon. And Elvis saw this 55-foot white wooden cross. And if you know anything about his background, he was a very religious man. So when he saw this, the way it was, told by people was that, it basically stopped him in his tracks. And he told his friend who was driving, let's pull over here. So when they got out, they found that it was actually a 140-plus acre ranch, and it was for sale. So he actually bought the ranch and moved his horses there. He bought horses for all his friends. The first horse that he bought actually was for Priscilla, and then one for her friend so that they could ride together. And so they moved all the horses over there, and he had, just from what everybody says, he just had the greatest time. It was, he would go off exploring on his horse, and acres and acres, and there was a big lake there and a bridge that crossed over, and he rode his horse across the bridge. And, there's a picture in the book of his father fishing. He went fishing in the lake, and, it was just like a really great, peaceful time for him at the Circle G. And the really neat part is a group of investors purchased the property, and they're working to restore it so that, Elvis fans and all kinds of, folks can go and see this ranch and enjoy it. And it just was like a real slice of heaven for Elvis, to go there and spend time there.
I'm glad you said this about the investors. Is that something that's going on now?
It is. And they were very helpful to us in, giving us pictures. There are several pictures in the book of the ranch. Yeah. The cross is still there, and they repainted the cross, and they're, fixing it up. And so you can kind of go and really see what he saw, when he came across this property. Sorry.
No. I like that part of the story, because I mean, there's a certain element that then gets to be preserved and doesn't go away, such that a unadvertised part of Elvis gets to stay with people forever.
Right.
And
right.
That's a good thing.
Right.
He had quite the inventory of horses. I mean, at some point. Was he just a horseman, or did he become some kind of an expert on the breeds and their value and what made a good horse and what didn't make a good horse? Did he become an expert at that?
I think it was more, if you mean I think he was more of a pleasure rider. He enjoyed them for pleasure, and he loved to give to people, and so he loved to, anything that he enjoyed, he liked to share with other people, regardless of the expense. So, he bought a horse for his dad, and he bought horses for all his friends, and then he bought horses for all his friends' wives, and, so it was more of just something that he enjoyed. I don't think he was a professional, or anything like that, but he was an excellent rider. And there is some footage of him riding his horse. And as a rider myself, I instantly could tell that, he was a natural rider. His hands were very soft, which means he had a good connection with the horse's mouth and the bit. And his feet was very soft. You could just tell that he was a natural in the saddle. And I think it just became a passion of his, just to be around them and to ride them.
He, there was, speaking of his generosity, he actually gave a horse to a little girl that kind of won all of her life. What was her name? Kim, I think?
Kim. And that was actually one of my favorite stories that we found. And the story was that she lived near the Circle G Ranch. And I think she was 7 or 8 years old, and she used to go and watch him ride. She would sit on the fence and watch him ride. And, she told her parents she wanted a horse. And he found out about that, and he found out that her birthday was coming up. So apparently he went and knocked on her door and spoke with her parents and her and said, I understand it's your birthday. And she said, yes. And he said, well, good, because I wouldn't want to have to return your present. And she said, well, what do you mean? And he took her outside, and he had a horse trailer and a horse that he had bought for her. So it just was another example of his generosity. And another similar story was at the Circle G, he was having some work done on the property, and he asked one of the men that was working there, do you have $1? And the guy, reached into his pocket and he gave him $1, and Elvis tossed him the keys to a new Ford truck. And he would just give away trucks and, horses and cars. And it seems like he just was a good person. And that's what really made this special for me to be able to write about.
There was some Hollywood footage, too, when he was in certain movies that he was actually on horses. I don't remember seeing a lot of Elvis movies, but I appreciate the reminder that you gave us on that. Was that kind of a surprise to Hollywood that he would have?
I'm sorry. Actually, the first movie that he was in was Love Me Tender, which was a Western, and he did ride in the movie. So that was his first movie ever. And then later on, he was in another one, Flaming Star, which is actually probably my favorite, because you could really see in the scenes that he really had honed his skills in the saddle, and he looked really comfortable in the saddle. Although there was a story that one of the horses took off with him during the filming and kind of shook his confidence a bit.
They tend to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And then he also did a movie that is called Charro, which means horseman in Spanish. And he played a cowboy. And in some of these scenes, of course they use stunt doubles for a lot of the, real dangerous scenes, but apparently he did some of the work himself. And one of these scenes involved roping a horse that was supposed to be like a wild horse out in the mountains. And they had to use him for the close-ups because, you'd be able to tell that it wasn't Elvis. And one of the stories that we found was that when he was doing this, he actually got rope burns on his hands.
Wow.
And later that day, he was walking through, a group of fans, and they were asking him for autographs. And he still, even though he was in pain, he gave autographs to everybody. And they noticed his hands were, all ripped up from the rope. And but again, another testament to his generosity and kindness was that he refused to, give in, and he said, I still want to, sign all the autographs and everything.
Now, he wanted, was there a particular breed? I know that you had mentioned in the book about Palominos.
Well, yes, Palomino is for people that don't know, it's actually a color. It's like a gold coat with a white mane and tail, and he wanted a Palomino. So the story was that he used to go knock on doors to farmers and ask them if they had a Palomino for sale. And eventually a man, heard this and said, I have a Palomino for sale. And he was a quarter horse. And his name at the time was Midgets Vandy, which apparently, for obvious reasons, Elvis decided to change. It wasn't a very catchy name. And so he named him Rising Sun. And that was his favorite horse, Rising Sun.
and then whatever happened.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say he also was interested in Tennessee walking horses.
Yeah.
And he had several, and his favorite was a black one. It was called Bear. And there are some pictures of him riding Bear as well.
What happened to his collection? Did it at some point, were they sold off, or, were they donated, or, he had, quite the investment. So,
right. From what I understood, some of them were sold off that belonged to different friends, but he did still have horses, and he had Rising Sun. Bear had passed away, and there was a story that Bear had passed away when Elvis was on tour, and his father didn't even want to tell him because he knew, how devastated he would be. Yeah. And so he did have horses when he died, and they stayed at Graceland, and Rising Sun lived 9 more years after Elvis, and then they buried him facing the rising sun. But then they still have horses there, actually. So his personal horses definitely stayed. And we interviewed Larry Geller, who was a close friend of Elvis, and he actually wrote the foreword for the book, which was incredible. And he was there throughout all of this. And so anyway, he told us various stories. And he said that, the horses were important to Elvis right up until the end. So,
well, there's a certain part of a human being that when they have, such an affection for animals, then that there's a real human side to them. And, in the case of Elvis, we've his fans, the audience put him up on a certain kind of pedestal, and that was the only thing that they saw. But, when it comes down to the real man and, his affection for horses and his dedication, I would say, to horses, and, the fact that he had such a large amount of generosity speaks to another side of him that we really never saw. When you approached this book, did you know some of that at the beginning, or was this kind of a surprise as you went through, in your research?
It was actually kind of a surprise because, as I had said, I wasn't really a fan when I started the project, and then I became a great fan because I just came across all these stories of how generous he was, and not just with horses too. There are other stories where he would see a woman, an older woman looking at a Cadillac, looking wistfully because she could never afford it, and he would go and buy it for her. Things like that. And I think that's what impressed me the most. And I've become, since I worked on this, I've become a huge fan of his. Mostly because I just am so impressed with the human being that he was. It was just, he never forgot where he came from, being poor, and just always was so kind. And, people that met him told me that, how kind he was. Everybody says that. He always took time for, fans and friends and everything. And, when you think of it, how many people of his stature would do that?
Yeah.
Would sit out on his horse, and sign autographs for 2 hours. It's things like that. It's just incredible that he would do that. And it's just very touching.
I think you've also done another service to the readers in the book, because you have actually listed his complete, I would say, portfolio of movies, the films that he did.
Right.
And, there's a whole generation now that really doesn't even know who Elvis is. And, so you're giving us yet another piece of the history when you're, listing for us the complete set of films. But you also did some interesting research on the pedigree of Rising Sun, that's fascinating. Tell us about that.
Well, being a horse person myself and, being fascinated with lineage and things like that, I decided to, look up his registration he was a quarter horse. And so it was interesting, and I thought, maybe some folks would enjoy seeing that, the different lineage of the horse and his relatives, and I just thought it would be something to add, something fun.
Well, that's a good thing. You've given us a lot of facts about Elvis that have, one, not been known, two, have been omitted or forgotten or not investigated. You've also given us a list of key events in his life. So, it's a very easy read. It's a fun read. It's a light read.
Thank you.
And I got to give you some high praise for this. But he wrote a Western saddle too. Did he ever write an English saddle?
Not that we could find.
That's kind of fascinating. Why just Western?
I don't know. Unfortunately, the man that was like his trainer, who helped train the horses and took care of the horses, passed away, before we started the book. So, that would have been a good interview to have. And like his farrier had passed away as well, and because they may have known, some of these little tidbits that are still, unanswered.
Well, it was fortunate that, he was able to be wealthy enough, I guess, or to have the funds enough to be able to be as generous and benevolent. But, taking care of a horse is a very expensive proposition, and it's a constant thing. So he had to carve out a lot of his life to, his passion for horses.
Exactly.
Was there some part in his life, Kim, that he just kind of had to give it all up, because other external, I would say, industry forces were taking.
And unfortunately, that's what we found had happened with the Circle G Ranch, that he was getting pressure from his manager, and actually even from his father too, a little bit, because he was worried about him spending so much money, and so he did end up selling the ranch after a year, which always makes me wonder, if he hadn't and he had kept that, would his life maybe have been different? Because it was that much more secluded, And just knowing, as a horse person myself, the healing, factors of having horses and just, being able to get away, I think was a huge thing for him. And I kind of feel wistful, like I wish he had kept that and, was able to keep it, because maybe things would have been different.
Ladies and gentlemen, the book is All the King's Horses, The Equestrian Life of Elvis Presley. Kimberly Gatto and Victoria Racimo. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for being here on the Denise Simon Experience. This has been a real pleasure and kind of an eye-opener, and so pleased that you have done a historical service to us that we necessarily didn't know. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. It was really my pleasure.
Good luck with the book, and thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience. We'll see you again very, very soon.
You're listening to Red Nation Rising Radio, the new dominant force in conservative internet talk radio.